Have you ever come to a point in your life where nothing feels easy anymore? Where everything just feels difficult? You know, what you're facing, what you're going through is just heartache. You look at tomorrow and there's like a dim glimmer of hope, and maybe in the near future, but it really doesn't even seem that near. So you begin to feel like there's this mountain that you're trying to scale, but you just can't get to the top. It just feels like it's a lost cause. Everything that is consuming your mind is breaking you, and everything that is breaking you is overwhelming you. It's just too hard. It's too hard to deal with what lies ahead. The good times in life begin to feel overshadowed by all the bad things, right? We just begin to remember all the bad things that we're facing right now, and anything that was good is forgotten. It's just in the past. It's in the distant past. There doesn't seem to be anything good ahead, so it just drains you of life, of joy, of anything good. Have you ever felt that way? Have you ever felt like it's just a lost cause? You don't even want to face today. You don't even want to face tomorrow. And the future, you don't even want to think about it. Just because it's overwhelming. Because there's uncertainty, there's worry, there's failure, there's pain. The reality of death, maybe. And it all becomes agents of fear. They all become agents that create fear in us. And we don't know what to do with it, right? We don't know how to navigate through all of it. What I love about the Bible is that really as we start to look at the accounts of the people in the Bible, it's regular people that have to deal with fear. They have to deal with the same emotions that we face every single day. In the book of Genesis, we find a couple by the name of Adam and Eve who are facing fear because they have just screwed things up. And you know what they do out of fear? They hide. They blame. They do everything that we would do, right? Then you fast forward, and in the book of Exodus, you find the story of a man by the name of Moses, who wrote the first 5 books of the Bible, which are called the Pentateuch. He writes those 5 books, but before God used him, he murdered a man. He murders a man, and you know what he does? He runs. Yet at the same time, in that messiness, there is something that happens. There's beauty in that. For most of us, when we think about failure, that's like our highlights. Those are the highlight moments that we remember, right? In people. So when we look at the Bible, we could remember the failures of Peter. We could remember the failure of King David. We could remember all the failures, but at the same time, do you remember the aftermath? Do you remember what happened after the failure? Because God can take that and do something with it. We remember the failure, but remember this. It was the failure of Adam and Eve that magnified the love and the grace of God towards humanity. If you think that failure is a bad thing, think about this. Now here's the thing, it's not making an exception for sin. What I'm saying is, in the midst of failure, when Moses murdered the man and ran, you know what actually brought him back? It was an encounter with God. And do you remember what that was with? The burning bush. It was as he was running away, God calls him to go back to Egypt to deliver the people of Israel. But we remember the failures, right? Do you remember the encounters? Do you remember those defining moments that happen afterwards, the aftermath? As we look at things in our lives that are broken, it's easy to think about it and just look at the moment and say, I don't like this. Yet an article that I read, I think, says it so good. It says it best. It said this: trust that this brokenness is a gift. Being broken keeps you soft, and it's exactly where there is broken and soft soil that there is growth. That makes sense to me. I'm not a farmer. We gave up on gardening because I can't grow a thing. So I know enough to know that if I'm planting a seed, I need to till the soil. I need to turn the soil so that I could plant something that will take roots and grow. And if the ground is hard, I need to break it. See, I know enough to know that it requires soft and broken soil to make something take roots and grow down. And so many times we don't see brokenness as a gift. We don't see it. We see brokenness as something where maybe God is not with us anymore. God has just left us. He's no longer with us. Brokenness is a perfect place for growth. In the midst of brokenness, we often see God's hand more visibly. And I've experienced that in my life. It is in the moments when I was broken that I saw God the closest. And sometimes that's hard to understand. Sometimes it's hard to understand that brokenness is really what we need to draw closer to God. Because you know what happens? What you were holding on to, you're broken, and you have to release it. And God can take it. Today I want to take you on a journey. Today I want to take you through a story that we find in the book of 1 Kings chapter 17, and it's a man named Elijah. I want to take you on a journey through his life here on earth. And the life of Elijah is phenomenal. The prophet Elijah experiences God in ways that most of us have never experienced, or probably will never experience. I pray that we do. But he experienced some pretty incredible things. So if you have your Bibles, turn with me to 1 Kings chapter 17, and we're going to be going, kind of skipping through some areas, but we're going to get to chapter 19. And verse 1, 1 Kings chapter 17, it's going to be up on the screen, says this. Now Elijah, who was from Tishbe in Gilead, told King Ahab, as surely as the Lord, the God of Israel lives, the God that I serve, there will be no dew or rain during the next few years until I give the word. You want to know what I see right here? It's not necessarily just a, hey, this is what's going to happen. It speaks of faith. It speaks of Elijah's faith, knowing who God is, and that he could trust him to do what he said. As surely as the Lord, the God of Israel lives, who I serve, not who I call myself a Christian, who I serve, who I follow, there will be no dew or rain during the next few years until I give the word. Now, as we read this, it's like, okay, well, there's going to be a miracle that's going to take place, right? There's going to be no rain because there is no rain. Think about this. Elijah prays for there to be no rain. There is no rain. When there is no water, it creates a famine, because now things are going to get hard with food as well. Elijah is not going anywhere. He has to deal with everything that's going to happen through this famine. He's in the middle of it. You know what that's creating, though? A great opportunity of growth for him to grow in dependency in God. We don't think about the reality that this requires trust in God to be the source, because what he's praying for, he's in the middle of. When was the last time that you prayed for God to do something so radical that you were going to be in the middle of it and you were forced to trust God? Verse 2 continues by saying this, and the Lord God said to Elijah, go to the east and hide by the Kerith brook, near where it enters the Jordan. Drink from the brook and eat what the ravens bring you, for I have commanded them to bring you food. You want to see something spectacular happen? Trust God. Trust God with something that is out of your control and into His. Because what Elijah experiences is the feeding, God feeding him through birds. That is a miracle in itself, right? He tells him, go to the brook, and there I will provide food for you. The ravens provide food for him. And there is this moment where you start to see, right? That builds trust. That builds faith. Because now you're putting yourself in a position that it's out of your control and into His. If you want to see God moving your life, trust Him with the big things. You could trust Him with the small things, but you're going to see Him in small ways. You want to see Him in big ways? Trust Him with the big things that are out of your control and into His. If you have your worship programs, feel free to write this down. God-sized moves require God-sized faith. Simple, right? You want to see something big? Then you got to trust big. You need to know that the God who you serve is able to do what you can't do. And it's going to require you to put yourself in positions that are uncomfortable, that are going to soften you. And there is going to be times where it may even break you. It's going to break you to the point where you're not going to know what the next step is. You're not going to know where your source is coming from. But do you trust the ultimate source? Do you trust that even when you feel alone, even when you feel rejected, even when you feel like there is nothing else to fight for, that God is your source? your faith will grow because you will begin to see God move. Because it is when it is soft and it is broken that you see things grow, right? And this is what Elijah experiences. He puts himself in a very unique scenario where he's saying, you know what, there's going to be no rain. I'm going to be in the midst of it. And he begins to see God move by providing food for him. And then the brook dries up. There's no more water. And the Lord says to Elijah, go to the nearest village and there will be a widow there. The widow has a son. And Elijah goes, encounters this widow, and says, can I have a little bit of water? She starts to go, and then he says, by the way, can you bring me some food as well? The woman says, you know what, we have a very, very little oil and very little flour. As a matter of fact, I was preparing my last meal. My son and I were getting ready to die. And he said, you know what, go and prepare food for me first, and afterwards, get some food for you and your son. The Lord will provide. And the Lord does. It's actually pretty interesting what happens. So what happens is she goes and cooks, and she never runs out of flour and oil. Every single day there's always enough, right? Because we trust that God is our provider. And I mean, think about this. Imagine going to your kitchen cupboards and there's always enough ramen. That would be phenomenal, right? There's always enough food. So God continues to do some incredible things. And Elijah continues to experience God in magnificent ways. However, in the midst of this time, 3 years are going to elapse before or we're moving on to happens. But within these 3 years, there's something that happens. The widow's son dies. Elijah prays for him, and he comes back to life. You want to see God move in incredible ways? Trust Him with things that are out of your control and into His. So now we see that Elijah has been provided with food by the ravens. We've seen that God has provided in ways that we can't even begin to imagine. And then we see that He even sees a resurrection take place with a son of the widow. These are incredible things, right? 3 years elapse. 3 years have happened. And now Elijah is going to go back to King Ahab, and he's about to say something to him. He's proposing a contest. A contest to see who is the real God. Now, during this time in history, Queen Jezebel, who is King Ahab's wife, has tried to kill all the Lord's prophets. She's tried to kill everybody that belonged to the Lord, right? And then the people of Israel had given into idolatry. They had given into the worship of a false god by the name of Baal. So what Elijah's proposing is pretty simple. He's saying, you know what, let's try to see who the real God is. We're going to offer sacrifices. The God that responds is the true God. Simple. But we will do it this way. The sacrifice has to be burnt, but no fire can be used. Simple. So the prophets of Baal decide to go first, and it says that they prepared one of the bulls and placed it on the altar. I know that this is a different time in history, and we don't bring bulls to sacrifice them, because our sacrifice has been done through Jesus Christ, but this is what was taking place. Then they called on the name of Baal from morning until noontime, shouting, "O Baal, answer us." But there was no reply of any kind. Then they danced, hobbling around the altar they had made. About noontime, Elijah began mocking them. "You'll have to shout louder," he scoffed, "for surely he is a god. Perhaps he is daydreaming or is relieving himself, or maybe he is away on a trip or is asleep and needs to be wakened." So Elijah's having a great time with this. He's not really a god, and I know I have nothing to worry about, so I'm just going to mock them. He begins to have fun with this. So they shouted louder, and following their normal customs, they cut themselves with knives and swords until blood gushed out. It says that they raved all afternoon until the time of the evening sacrifice, but still, there was no sound, no reply, no response. It sounds crazy to me. But you want me to be honest? What we do sounds crazy to me too, because we look no different. We continue to go back to our idols, hoping that they're going to somehow satisfy us, hoping that somehow we're going to be able to take control of our situations. Yet at the same time, we have no response. There's nothing that changes. Instead of giving it over to God, we're giving it to places where we have no different results. We're insane. It's insanity. It's doing the same thing over and over again, expecting different results. Elijah goes afterwards and he takes 12 stones representing the 12 tribes of Israel and rebuilds the altar of the Lord. He digs a trench around the altar, and it says that this trench that he's actually digging can hold up to 3 gallons of water. So he asks the people to bring together these large water jars that can hold plenty of water, and they're going to pour them over the sacrifice and over the altar, over the wood and everything. So Elijah's pretty much saying, make it even more impossible. How many of us would actually do that when we have hard situations in our lives? Make it more impossible. No, we want it simple, right? Because we don't want to trust anybody but ourselves. But Elijah says, pour water over it. So they pour the 4 large jars over it. And then he says, do it again. And he does that 3 times. So by now, everything is completely soaked. The wood is soaked. The sacrifice is soaked. And by our standard, it's pretty much impossible to start that, right? Because if anybody has tried to start a campfire with wet wood, you know that it's pretty hard to do. So at this point, he knows that he doesn't need matches because he trusts a God who exists outside of our possibilities, and he's going to do whatever he pleases, and he can do the impossible, right? 1 Kings 18:38 goes on by saying that immediately the fire of the Lord flashed down from heaven and burned up the young bull, the wood, the stones, and the dust. It even licked up all the water in the trench. And when all the people saw it, they fell face down on the ground and cried out, "The Lord, yes, He is God. Yes, the Lord is God." God wins. Right? Because we serve a God who doesn't work within what we consider possible. He can do whatever He pleases, with whatever He pleases, and He can do it all. I know the God that I serve is not bound by what I can do. He works outside of my doings. God wins, and the prophets of Baal are killed. They are no more. After this display of power, God's power, Elijah prays for rain, and the rain comes. And this is where I really want to focus on. I'm telling you that I'm taking you on a journey, right? I'm taking you through the journey of Elijah. But that's not the only journey that I'm taking you through today. King Ahab goes back home to his wife, because that's what every good man does. He goes and tell his wife everything that happened behind closed doors. And we get to chapter 19. And it says that when Ahab got home, he told Jezebel everything Elijah had done, including the way he had killed all the prophets of Baal. Now remember, Jezebel was rooting for the prophets of Baal and was trying to kill the prophets of the Lord. So it says that Jezebel sent this message to Elijah. "May the God strike me and even kill me, if by this time tomorrow I have not killed you, just as you have killed them." Jezebel is threatening God's prophet Elijah. Elijah was afraid and fled for his life. He went to Beersheba, a town in Judah, and he left his servants there. There's that fear thing again, right? When things are hard, just like the opening clip with the pastor in God's Not Dead 3. When things get hard, sometimes it's easier to just move back. Sometimes it's easier to run the opposite way. Because it takes less effort. But then it says that then he went on alone into the wilderness, traveling all day. He sat down under a solitary broom tree and prayed that he might die. This is a prophet. "I have had enough, Lord," he said. "Take my life, for I am no better than my ancestors who have already died." Elijah is done with life. It doesn't feel good anymore. It's no longer easy. The road is painful and he runs. This same Elijah who experienced God in phenomenal ways, all of a sudden now he's doubting. And he's saying, "You know what? God, just take it. Just end it all." And he starts comparing himself to the people before him, saying, "I'm no better than the people that were before me. I'm no better than the ancestors that were here before me." How many times when life gets hard do we feel like Elijah just saying, God, just take it. I'm done. The people of the Bible don't look very different from us. There is failure, there is fear, there is doubt, there is running, there is hiding. But at the same time, they embark on a journey. And that is what we want to focus on today. This is the same Elijah who was provided by the ravens. This is the same Elijah who kept on seeing food multiply. This is the same Elijah who saw a young boy come back to life. Yet, now you hear the words, I have had enough. I'm done. Lord, just end it all. Finish it. Elijah's life starts to sound a lot like us, where we can't even focus on the good times. We go from mountaintop experiences where everything is great to rock bottom moments when we can't see Him. We go from moments when we feel God so close to us and we're like, He's right there. He's not very far away. And if somebody tells you that God doesn't exist, you're like, man, whatever. I know that my God exists. To moments that you feel so alone and you're wondering where God is at that moment. And as Elijah has hit this rock bottom moment, it begins a new chapter and a new phase of a journey that will define a significant moment in Elijah's life. And this is it. It says, then the angel of the Lord came again and touched him and said, get up and eat some more, or the journey ahead will be too much for you. So he got up and ate and drank, and the food gave him enough strength to travel 40 days and 40 nights to Mount Sinai, the mountain of God. He begins embarking on this journey that's going to take him a while. 40 days and 40 nights. Sometimes we think, when we have hit rock bottom, we think, you know what, it should be a quick journey. God should be here right now. It's a journey. It's a journey that's going to grow you, and it's going to take a while, but you're going to get there back to the top. In his brokenness, it leads him on a journey to the mountaintop, to the mountain of God. And this will be a life-defining journey. Our brokenness and our failure. Brokenness can overwhelm us, but it's a journey that defines us. See, brokenness in our life, it's going to feel like it's going to collapse on us. But the journey that we embark in, that's what's going to define us, not our failures. As people of God, we will embark on journeys that are going to define our lives, not only here on earth, but into eternity. And Elijah begins his journey to the mountaintop. Troubles have overwhelmed him. He feels defeated. He feels like everything is over and wishes it would be over. And then he has this God encounter. It's not in a perfect moment. It's in a broken moment, right? Because brokenness is a gift. Elijah's consumed by fear, finds himself at the bottom, and then it says this. He gets to the mountain, and it says that the Lord said, go out and stand before me on the mountain. And as Elijah stood there, the Lord passed by, and a mighty windstorm hit the mountain. It was such a terrible blast that the rocks were torn loose, but the Lord was not in the wind. After the wind, there was an earthquake, but the Lord was not in the earthquake. And after the earthquake, there was a fire, but the Lord was not in the fire. And after the fire, there was a sound of a gentle whisper. Can you imagine the chaos? You start to hear all this, and then in the midst of it all, you hear a whisper. When Elijah heard it, he wrapped his face in his cloak and went out and stood at the entrance of the cave. And a voice said, what are you doing here? When the storms of life seem too overwhelming to handle and everything is falling apart, when our lives are shaken to the very core, when we are in the middle of a fire, God is there. Sometimes we look at all those things and we're saying, God's doing all this, it's Him. Yet the Lord is not in any of those things. He is a gentle whisper that meets us in the epicenter of our chaos. And He asks, what are you doing here? Just like Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego in the fire, God is with us. Just like the raging storm in the boat where the disciples were at, Jesus is with us and can calm those storms. Just like the earthquake after the death of Jesus that tore the veil in two, God makes a way where there seems to be no way. Where there seems to be nothing but chaos, God makes a way. He meets us in the middle of it. And at the moment, you may feel like everything is just falling apart and keeps on crashing over you. But it could be the start of a journey that is life-defining. It could be a journey that will draw you closer to God. And as we get to the end of Elijah's journey, or this part of Elisha's journey, I come to this moment of realization that it's not much different than us. You see, this is not a clever name for a message. It's not a clever name for our church. Epicenter is not just a name that identifies our church. It is our manifesto. It is what we believe and hold on to, because there is much more to that word than just what you think it means. I've gone to different places and people say, oh yeah, it's Epic Church. No. We're epic for sure, but no, that's not what it is. There's more to it. Epicenter is the reason that we exist. And if you don't know what that word epicenter means, let me define it for you at this moment. It is a central point of something, typically a difficult or unpleasant situation. We want to be a church that is meeting people at the epicenter of their lives. When everything is falling apart, when everything is crumbling, when everything seems to be out of your control, we want to point you to the God who can take it all into His control. We don't exist for ourselves. We exist to make Jesus known in our community. We exist so that people can experience God at the center point of their experiences that are falling and crumbling. I want to paint a picture for you as we close today. If you are not familiar with our logo, it looks a little bit like this. And it's a picture, because I love pictures. Epicenter is a journey. And it's a journey up a mountain that seems too large to skip. And it's a journey that we embark in when everything is falling apart and we feel like giving up in life. When everything is consuming us, just like Elijah. When we feel threatened, when we feel hurt, when we feel like God is no longer there. It is a journey that we embark in to the mountain of God. And it is at that moment that God meets us at the epicenter of it. It is a journey that we embark in. It's not your failure that defines you. It's a journey that defines us. The journey back to the top. And maybe you've been a Christian all your life. And you feel dry. You feel like there's nothing more. It's a journey that defines us. It's not our failures. We don't exist to just create something. There's plenty of churches. And that's not bashing any. But we believe that what we do matters. How we do it matters. As we begin this journey, I know that the one thing that we could focus on is epic. It's not that. Read the rest. Epic enter. It's an epic enter into a relationship with the Creator of the universe, who gave everything for you and for me so that we could have a relationship with Him. A relationship that was once broken. It is in the epicenter of our lives, when everything is falling apart, that we can grow. Why? Because it requires broken and soft things for things to take roots. 3 months ago led to this moment today. 3 months ago, there was a there was an idea that came up. It's been more than 3 months, but 3 months it began. It was in the month of April that the idea came about. And I'm going to be honest, there are many days that I'm filled with fear. There's many days that I'm filled with doubt. There's a ton of days that I'm empty of any kind of confidence in me. And that's a perfect place to be at. Because it's not about me. It's about what God can do for broken people. During those times, there was options as to what would be the next step for us in this journey of life. And I'll be honest, there was a lot of other options that came up, some of them that required less faith, some of them that seemed easier and comfortable. But I could tell you one thing, none of those things would have taken God-sized faith to see God-sized moves. After my wife and I prayed, we started the Epicenter journey. And there was nights that I remember being in bed and waking up overwhelmed with life. Just overwhelmed with everything that lied ahead. Because I couldn't see anything that I could do in case something went wrong. And that's a beauty. It puts us in a place that can break us. And I have seen God move in incredible ways in my life before, and I had no reason to doubt that He could do it again. I have seen a faithful God who is good even when I'm not. And there was this desire to build a church that would require God-sized faith to see this God-sized move. So a group of 30 people, 11 adults, 19 kids and teens in that, began this journey to create a manifesto that would benefit the people outside these walls instead of the people inside of them. Because the moment that we care more about the inside, we forgot about our neighbors. And Jesus said, when asked, what is the greatest commandment? He summarized it in Mark chapter 12, verse 30. He said, love the Lord your God with all your heart, soul, mind, and strength. And the second one is equally as important, which is love your neighbor as yourself. Our manifesto, our belief, what we hold on to, our mission statement is about worrying more about the people out there than the people in here. Because if you know Christ, I pray that you're doing the same thing. It's not about you. It's not about me. Once again, because what we do and how we do it matters. Epicenter was birthed out of this desire to do things differently for the sake of those that don't know Jesus. Because we understand that people without Jesus, and I'm going to say a very unpopular truth, because we go to a lot of funerals that we hear these words, they were a good person and we're so glad that they're in heaven. I'm sorry, if people are not living for Jesus Christ, they are entering into an eternity apart from Him in hell. That's the reason that the church matters. Because we have the good news. We have the truth. And you might say, how do you know that your truth matters the most? Because I know that out of every God, the only one that is not in a tomb is Jesus Christ. And I'm willing to hold on to the truth of that. As people come in here, you're coming to in your Epicenter moments, and I'm not the one that's going to fix you. I can't fix you. I can't even fix myself. But I can point you in the direction of He who can fix you. And it is Jesus Christ alone. We can establish a church. We can build a church. But if the foundation, if the cornerstone, if the hope is not Jesus Christ, we built it in vain. There's no reason for Epicenter to exist. As people started to get behind the idea of Epicenter, understand that it's a very small group. 11 adults is a very small group to do the things that have come about now. But God can move mountains with small faith. With greater faith, imagine what you can imagine what God can do through your faith. If God could change the world with 11 apostles, with 11 disciples, 11 people that would take the good news and spread it throughout the world, imagine what he could do with 11 people, with 11 adults and 19 kids, to the city, to the culture of Wadena, Minnesota, and the surrounding areas. And we prayed to the ends of the earth. Imagine what God can do. Now imagine what God can do if all of us stopped making church about ourselves and cared more for our neighbors than we do about ourselves. That we meet people not when their lives are perfect, but when they're messy. Because that's what Jesus would do. I'm never going to call your mess normal. I'm never going to say that your mess is okay. I am always going to call mess sin. But I know that Jesus Christ can meet you there and pull you out of that life. Jesus has to be the center point at the epicenter of our chaos. Your journey will define you. If you have had faith and maybe you're just running away from it, and if you continue to run from it, that's what's going to define your life. That will be the journey that defines you. Not just here on earth, but into eternity. If your life is a mess and it's falling apart, and you just want to hide and not experience grace, you can do that. But that's the journey that defines you. God meets us at the epicenter of our chaos and calls us and says, what are you doing here? And if you don't have that hope today, I want to give you an opportunity. Let's close in prayer.